Okay, let's jump right in. As a political historian, I look at a lot of empire building, but the formation of the Maurya Empire over 2,300 years ago, well, it's honestly a classroom masterclass in statecraft, espionage, and just ruthless strategy. Today's explainer is going to break down exactly how one man's strategic genius took a highly fractured subcontinent and transformed it into an absolute fortress of an ancient superpower.
And it all kicks off with this wild quote. Listen, this wasn't just some angry vow of personal revenge. It was quite literally the ultimate geopolitical death warrant, delivered by a penniless scholar to the richest, most powerful king in India. The scholar was Chanakya, and the king was Dhanananda of the mighty Nanda Dynasty. See, Chanakya had gone to the capital to warn the king about an impending foreign invasion. But instead of listening, Dhanananda mocked him for his unconventional appearance, insulted him, and had him dragged out by his top knot. For a scholar, that's a profound, unforgivable insult. And you know what? That single moment of sheer arrogance from the king essentially sealed the fate of his entire empire. So here is our syllabus for today's explainer. 1. A geopolitical crisis. 2. Architect of the empire. 3. Psychological and guerrilla warfare. 4. The fall of Magadh. 5. Diplomacy and empire consolidation. And finally, 6. The enduring Mauryan legacy. Let's get into it. Section 1. A geopolitical crisis. Fragmented India versus foreign invaders. It's a massive question, right? Can one man's intellect actually change the map of the world? But as we'll see, intellect, when it's coupled with a ruthless, calculated strategy, absolutely can redraw borders. At this point in time, the Indian subcontinent was just completely fragmented. You had all these regional kings constantly fighting amongst themselves, and they were totally blind to the fact that Alexander the Great was marching his seemingly invincible Greek army right toward their front door. To counter this, Chanakya developed this core strategic concept, Akhand Bharat. This was his overarching macro defense against the incoming Greek threat. He looked at the board and realized that a bunch of divided, squabbling kingdoms would be steamrolled by Alexander in no time. The only logical defense? Forced unification. To save the land, he basically had to conquer it first from within. And that brings us to the crucial contrast between the decaying internal power of the Nanda Dynasty and the sharp intellectual vision of our main strategist. I mean, look at Dhanananda. The guy had a massive army of 200,000 soldiers and thousands of war elephants, but he was corrupt to the core, addicted to luxury, and entirely driven by his own ego. Chanakya, on the flip side, 0 soldiers, 0 wealth. But what he did have was a razor-sharp intellect and a singular, highly focused vision. Section 2. Architect of the Empire, from bullied scholar to kingmaker. Now, to really understand this empire, we have to look at the psychological profile of its architect. Despite being mocked for his appearance as a kid, he possessed just a phenomenal mind. Legend has it that he was actually born with his front teeth already visible. Astrologers at the time claimed this was a surefire sign he was destined to rule the world. Well, his father was terrified his son would grow up to be a corrupt tyrant, so he physically broke the infant's teeth. After that, the astrologers amended their prophecy. They said, okay, he won't be a king, but he will become the ultimate kingmaker. So his father's harsh choice, along with his own incredible patience, shaped him into the ultimate puppet master. We can track his journey from mastering his scholarly studies at Takshashila, which was basically the greatest intellectual hub of the ancient world, all the way to recruiting his secret weapon. See, after that devastating insult by Dhanananda, Chanakya wandered into the forests. And there, he found a young boy resolving disputes among his friends in a game of Raj Keelam, or playing king. Chanakya instantly recognized the fearlessness and natural leadership in this kid. So he literally bought the boy from his parents with gold coins. That boy was Chandragupta, and Chanakya immediately began molding him into a political and military weapon. Moving on to Section 3, Psychological and Guerrilla Warfare, defeating Alexander and adapting tactics. This part right here is where the textbook military strategy truly kicks in. Chanakya knew he couldn't fight Alexander the Great directly, right? So he leaned heavily into psyops. First, he infiltrates the Greek camps with spies to spread rumors that the local gods are furious with them. To back up those rumors, he secretly has slow-acting toxins slipped into their food and water, causing all these inexplicable illnesses. Then he uses back channels to spread terrifying, exaggerated tales about Magadh having 6,000 monstrous war elephants just wading across the river. The result? The Greek soldiers, who are already exhausted from years of campaigning, absolutely panic. They mutiny and force Alexander to retreat. Chanakya literally defeated an undefeated army without firing a single arrow. But he wasn't infallible. Initially, Chanakya and Chandragupta actually got a bit overconfident. They built a small army, attacked the capital directly, and frankly, they were slaughtered. They had to go into hiding. While starving in a remote village, Chanakya overheard an old woman scolding her child. The kid had burned his hand trying to eat hot khichdi from the center of the plate. She told him, "Eat from the edges." It was a massive light bulb moment for Chanakya's geopolitical strategy. You don't attack a fortified center. You eat away at the vulnerable perimeter first. And to destabilize that perimeter, he employed something truly terrifying, the Vishkanyas. This was a covert intelligence branch of poison girls. Chanakya would find orphaned girls and feed them microdoses of poison from childhood until their very bodily fluids became lethal. He deployed them as spies and assassins to target Dhanananda's key generals and allied kings. Suddenly, the enemy's leadership simply began dying in their sleep. It spread absolute terror and confusion from the inside out, again without a single battlefield casualty. Section 4. The Fall of Magadh, the Strategy of Sabotage and Siege. So, with the perimeter sufficiently weakened, it was time to execute the final consolidation of power. Chanakya promised half the empire to a Himalayan king in exchange for troops. When Dhanananda's massive war elephants finally charged, they didn't hit a front line. They fell straight into hidden trenches laced with poisoned thorns, an absolutely perfect countermeasure. Meanwhile, inside the capital, Chanakya's spies were working overtime, spreading rumors that the king was going to execute his own ministers. So by the time Chandragupta's forces laid siege and cut off the food supply, the city was already completely tearing itself apart from paranoia and starvation. And I want to highlight this specific diplomatic masterstroke because this is peak statecraft. The enemy's brilliant prime minister, Rakshasa, had tried to assassinate Chandragupta using underground tunnels. Chanakya catches him, but instead of executing him, Chanakya actually hands Rakshasa his own signet ring. He flips him. He appeals to his patriotism, basically saying, "Look, you love this nation, and so do I. It needs your intellect." You see, you don't just destroy your capable enemies. A true state builder co-opts their infrastructure and their talent for the newly formed government.
Section 5. Diplomacy and Empire Consolidation, Expanding the Borders.
With internal control finally secured, the new empire faced an external threat that required serious diplomatic brilliance. In 305 BCE, Seleucus Nicator, who was Alexander's top general, came back to finish what his boss started. But Seleucus severely underestimated this new Mauryan Empire. Chanakya had drilled Chandragupta's forces into a unified, iron-willed war machine. When the Greek cavalry met the battle-hardened Elephant Corps, the Greeks were completely and utterly decimated. Now, the treaty that followed? As a historian, I can tell you this screams political genius. Instead of executing Seleucus, Chanakya forced a treaty that handed the Mauryan Empire almost all of modern-day Afghanistan and Pakistan. And what did he give up in exchange? A measly 500 elephants. Plus, to prevent any future Greek invasions, he arranged a marriage between Chandragupta and Seleucus's daughter, Helena. But here is the absolute kicker. Chanakya legally stipulated that no child born of Helena could ever inherit the throne of Magadha. He completely neutralized any long-term foreign takeover of the empire's core bloodline.
But listen, statecraft requires terrifying sacrifices. To protect the king from the constant threat of assassination, Chanakya had been secretly feeding Chandragupta microdoses of poison for years to build up his immunity. Tragically, one day the pregnant Queen Durdara accidentally ate from the king's plate and collapsed. In a brutal split-second calculation to save the dynastic line, Chanakya actually cut open the dying queen to deliver the baby. A single drop of poison touched the infant's forehead, leaving a blue dot, which is why the royal heir was named Bindusara. It's dark, but it was a calculated move to save the empire's future.
And that brings us to Section 6, the enduring Mauryan legacy, the immortality of ideas. Decades later, even as an old man, Chanakya was still playing 3D chess. When King Bindusara was tricked by rivals into believing Chanakya murdered his mother, the old strategist quietly accepted exile to starve himself. A corrupt minister named Subandhu thought he'd finally won and went to burn Chanakya's hut, but Chanakya had left behind a booby-trapped chest, claiming it held royal blessing oil. It was actually a lethal contact poison. Subandhu greedily rubbed it on himself and died in agony. So he eliminated his rival from beyond the grave. And even as he faded away, Chanakya had already arranged for the secret training of a fierce young prince, the boy we now know as Emperor Ashoka the Great.
So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. How are these 2,300-year-old tactics still being perfectly mirrored in our world today? Chanakya's texts, the Arthashastra and Chanakya Niti, codified the idea that enemies aren't just defeated with swords. You defeat them by confusing their intellect, breaking their alliances, and controlling the flow of information. Whether we're talking about modern corporate espionage or global geopolitical maneuvering, the core principles of the architect of the Maurya Empire are still very much alive and in play. Keep that in mind the next time you look at the shifting map of the world.